I mean, I was told by my film professor, there are films and there are movies. And sometimes you've got to know what you're walking into.
Yeah. See, but I come from a time when movies were films.
I've been somewhat of a Planet of the Apes fan for a pretty long time now. Not exactly a fan, but somewhat of an enthusiast. I haven't had the most experience like others, but I do have a deep love and passion for this franchise. Specifically, more recently from the previous trilogy, which is very good. I rewatched that trilogy a little bit recently here, and it's definitely one of the better trilogies of all time. Rise of the Planet of the Apes, not my favorite, but it's still a solid entry into this trilogy. And Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, one of the best sequels really ever made. After Matt Reeves took over, this is just straight masterpiece territory. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, not only a good Planet of the Apes film, but a good film in general. It's just so well done. It's so exquisite. And then War of the Planet of the Apes, truly a masterpiece, truly something incredibly special. The previous Planet of the Apes trilogy is truly one of the best things to ever come out of Hollywood ever. And the thought of a new Planet of the Apes film being a continuation to that trilogy felt like a terrible idea. I mean, we live in an age where reboots and remakes are done almost every single week, and they're all somewhat hit or miss. So the idea of a new Planet of the Apes film felt like a very dumb idea. I don't want to see this trilogy get ruined like I've seen many other franchises get ruined in the past. That was until the teaser trailer dropped for this movie. After I saw the teaser trailer, I was just proven to be an idiot because this movie really looked incredible. I was really hyped from day one after seeing that trailer, and April 10th, this film came out, and I definitely have something to say about it because it was an interesting movie. This film comes to us from Wes Ball, the same director who did the Maze Runner trilogy, an overall pretty solid trilogy. I love those movies. Objectively, not the best films ever, but still, Wes Ball did a pretty good job with those. This movie is written from Josh Friedman. Cinematography is done by Guilla Pados, and the composing for this movie is done by John Paciano, who did the score for the Spider-Man PS4 game, also Daredevil, and also Maze Runner. He's a really good composer, and here he does an incredible job. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but, let's keep going here. Many years after the reign of Caesar, a young ape goes on a journey that will lead him to question everything he's been taught about the past and make choices that will lead him to the future for the Planet of the Apes and humans alike. And now, like I said, how did I exactly feel about this movie going into it? Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I was interested in this movie. I've been disappointed a lot by movies in the past, so I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, but this movie still interested me just because this world of the Planet of the Apes can be done so well if they do it right. And so to test that theory, I saw it on last week, Thursday, and it's safe to say this movie was really good. I really did enjoy it. It has some problems, but overall, I think it was a really great film. There's definitely a lot to hate and a lot to love with this trilogy and this movie alike, but I think this is definitely a worthy continuation to go on with this franchise that's very deserving.
His words! What a wonderful day!
Let's just go ahead and start diving into the real meat and potatoes for this movie. Really, this movie is so good because it feels like its own film. And I talked about it before, this movie isn't exactly a legacy sequel. I guess kind of it is. I mean, this movie is only like a sequel after like 6 years. That's how long it's been since War of the Planet of the Apes. But this movie is still, I guess, a legacy sequel, but it's done so well to where it feels like its own movie. And this movie is a continuation of that previous trilogy. You can watch that old trilogy if you want to, but if you don't want to watch that old trilogy, you don't exactly have to. I would still recommend you do that, but if you just want to raw dog this movie with no previous experience, you absolutely can. And that's something that I'd say is a good thing and also kind of a bad thing at times. But this movie is really good at doing its own thing. New characters, new world, new story. Really just not exactly straying away from the old films, but just making its own world and its own movie. That may sound a little bit weird and derivative for a film to be its own film, but in a world where we live in a cinema of just a lot of cash grabs and just, nostalgia baiting, it feels tasteless a lot of the time. This movie does a lot of things really good with its own movie being a legacy sequel. It feels earned. It feels like nothing's really being derivative or just Oscar baity or even nostalgia baity. It's really its own thing, which makes it really good. Now, the next really big pro for this film is the CGI and the motion capture for this movie. This is some of the best CGI that I've seen in the last 5 years. The CGI motion capture is just incredibly well done. So much detail. It feels real at times. It's actually really scary. And when we got to the point that was War of the Planet of the Apes, the CGI was just really incredible at that point. Even watching it like 6 years later, that CGI still holds up and it still looks absolutely exquisite. And in this movie, I didn't think they could really top that, but they did in a lot of the scenes. And it also may sound kind of weird and derivative for a movie that released in 2024 to have good CGI, but in recent films like we've seen before with The Flash and also Ant-Man and Wasp, Quantumania, new films can have pretty bad CGI, but this movie is some of the best I've seen in years, and I definitely am really happy about that. It shouldn't even exactly be a tall order for a film to have good CGI, but in this movie, What a Digital just went all out here. Just incredible detail, exquisite, just so much in every single shot. You can see that they wanted it to be the best that it could possibly be, and in this film, it's accomplished incredibly well. And with other movies like The Flash, Ant-Man and Wasp, Quantumania, having bigger budgets than this movie, it's pretty sad at times. And also, yeah, She-Hulk as well being like a $200 million TV show, having that bad of CGI, then go something like this and tell you, hey, this movie had a budget that's less than that. It's pretty sad. Also, the music, John Pasciano, he's an incredible composer. I don't have a lot of his stuff on my playlist, but he's still just really good, from Daredevil to Spider-Man. He's just always cooking up something here. In this movie, he did incredible. Coming off of the heels of Michael Giacchino, an absolutely top 3 composer of all time, he had a lot to really go through to really live up to that, and he did incredible here. I haven't gone back and heard the score from this film quite yet, but just trust me when I say it's just really incredible, really worth it, really epic and triumphant. And my other big pro for this film is that the world building and the lore for this movie is just really incredibly masterful. When I look at other franchises like Star Wars, I see that franchises can kind of feel too contained at times when you let it get to that point. With Star Wars, they really only focus on the Skywalker story, which made that world and that universe feel so contained. So now whatever they do that's not a Skywalker movie feels just weird and off for some reason. With this franchise, Planet of the Apes, whatever they decide to do is going to really benefit the world, since it's really only going forward. Even if they decide to do a prequel to this movie, it's still not going to feel like a Caesar-centric movie. They're really only branching away from that in a good way and deciding to expand on this world, which really is a smart decision. Meanwhile, other franchises, too contained, too, minimal, and not really massive as they can be. So it doesn't really exactly matter what they decide to do with this new franchise, but whatever they do with this franchise, it'll be for the benefit. It'll be for the better of this universe. And also something that's a little bit better is that it doesn't even end on a way that's exactly a cliffhanger. This movie can go into another installment, but if they decide to end here, I wouldn't exactly be mad. They definitely want to go the route of like 5, 6 more films, but they don't need to, which is what makes it good. This movie feels like its own thing a lot of the time. It doesn't feel like it's homework by any means either. It's not like an MCU movie where I need to watch like 80 films just to watch one mediocre 3 out of 10 movie. If you show Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes to someone who has never seen a Planet of the Apes film their entire life, this would be a really good introduction to this franchise. And if you're a longtime fan of this franchise, you'll also really enjoy it. I fall kind of somewhere in the middle of those two things, but still this film was definitely a treat and something that I'll really enjoy. Not the best film of the year, but one that's really solid. So now all that being said, this film's good, it's solid, I enjoyed it for a lot of different reasons. The CGI, the lore of the world, all that stuff, really good. But there's also some cons with this movie, and like any movie in the world, there's cons in this film, and some I can kind of debunk, others not so much. So the first thing that's kind of just, not too good with this movie is that it's boring. That's a really weird critique, one that I don't really say a lot of the time, but this movie is, I'll admit it, pretty boring. And it's not like this movie is exactly just boring in terms of its plot. The plot's really interesting. I'm really invested in it. The pacing's also really good. This movie has a similar pacing and just structure to that of Avatar: Way of Water, a film that's really masterful as well. But this film is still just boring. What it's doing and how it's doing it is really boring. I'm invested in the story, but how it's telling the story is boring. Not exactly slowly paced, it's pretty fast, but it still can be at times really slow and sluggish for really no reason. And I know this is the first film in somewhat of a soft reboot continuation of the franchise here, but still I think that they have to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. It just feels too slow at times. I understand, introduce the world, the characters, the motives, all that's understandable. I understand that. And with the first film in a trilogy, it can be the hardest for a lot of different reasons. I mean, you have to introduce the characters, the world, and really just also set up this trilogy moving forward. There's a lot that really has to go into making a good introduction to a franchise, and this film is no different. That being said, I think that they should have just kind of pulled back on all of that introduction stuff and kind of pushed forward with more of the plot here. The villain in this movie is really good. He's really, really good and really interesting, but he doesn't have that much time to be good. He is really good when he's good, but he needed at least like 5 more minutes of screen time. And kind of another thing that also involves the villain here, which is our next con, being that this movie is also kind of too safe at times. If you listen back to the episode where I talked about the teaser trailer for this movie, I really talked about a lot of the points that this film should really hit for it to be a really incredible movie. Mainly, the main thing I really wanted to see this film do was really dive into what Caesar did and his impact on apes. Now, that being said, Caesar isn't in this movie. He is in this movie, though, in a sense that his presence is felt, and the actions that he took in those previous films really echo within this next movie. And also, I'll kind of debunk my critique here by saying that this movie takes place 300 years after War of the Planet of the Apes, so you not only have to do all that exposition with this new world and these new characters, but it's also a lot to ask for 300 years worth of exposition, which is a lot more than what a lot of other films have to go through. So when making this movie, you're really at a crossroads between A, having to do 300 years worth of exposition, or B, really just focusing on this new characters and this new franchise movie. And it's smart to go with the second option here because this movie is trying to do a lot and set up a lot, and you don't really have time to dive into previous characters and previous stories from a series that got already 3 movies. So it's understandable. It makes sense to me. I get why they couldn't really do what I wanted them to with this movie, but I can't help but think this movie has a lot of potential that's just really left on the cutting room floor. It doesn't exactly make this film a bad movie, but I just can't help but think they had like an open 3 to just dive into so much cool stuff and lore with this world that they didn't really want to do, which is understandable, but just kind of disappointing. And this movie still does dive into what I wanted it to dive into, and the way that this movie ends is definitely going in the way that I expected it to end, and also the way that I would want this movie to end, but it's just the fact that we could have gotten more, and maybe within more movies we'll get just more of what I wanted here, but for now, it's just not quite there, but it's still good at what it's trying to do, just not enough of what I want it to do. So what is the final verdict for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes? And for me, the final verdict is a B-. This movie is definitely solid, a lot of potential that's really just left on the cutting room floor, but for what it's doing, I'm interested here. There's a lot that this world has to go through and a lot it has to tell, and this is a solid stepping point into that right direction. So is it exactly worth your time? I say that it is. Form your own opinion, number 1, but for number 2, in my opinion, it is really good. It's definitely worth your time to go out and see, preferably in IMAX. It's really good in IMAX, and I definitely think that you would love it in IMAX. I'm not even sponsored, I really should be, but that's just me as a fan saying IMAX is the best way to view this movie, nothing more, nothing less. And with this movie, it kind of has like the same vibe and aura of that of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, a film that isn't exactly bad, a lot of potential that's explored a lot more in the next few films that we got, like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and also War for the Planet of the Apes, really just kind of elevate that trilogy and do things that Rise really didn't have the ability to do at the time. So we could be seeing a reincarnated version of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, a film that really wants to do a lot but just can't do it quite yet because it has a lot of just meat and potatoes and bones to get through. This movie is really good. It is a really fun time, but it has a lot to go through here, a lot of homework and just boring, busy stuff to do, busy work. That's all it is, just really a lot of busy work, saying what's going on, introducing the motives, characters, all that good stuff. And in the next movie, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever they decide to do from here on out, it's going to be just pure fun, pure exploration, no more of that boring setup and exposition, just pure good time. So I say hop on the hype train before it's too late and go ahead and dive into Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes at your nearest IMAX theater. Well, that wraps it up for this week's episode of the Court of Cinema podcast. Main verdict, main overall theme of this episode, go see the movie for yourself, form your own opinion, and also it's just really good, a really good film. Stay up to date with everything Court of Cinema by following us on all of our socials down below in the show notes. Also, a new feature, send us fan mail. It's a really weird new thing they have going on now. Fan mail, you can send us just cool, fun messages, some positive, or if you want to just hate on the show and tell me that I'm doing really bad, do that too. I want to hear from you guys. I want to see how the new feature works. So let me know, send fan mail down below. Message and data rates may apply if you're out of the country, but if you're in the US, you should be good, but don't quote me. The next few episodes we're going to be doing here on the podcast are probably going to be X-Men. I took a little break from that series, a little bit of vacation. I know, I'll admit it, I'm sorry, but it's time for me to get back to work with that series. So X-Men First Class will be the next film in that series. And overall, somewhat fun time we've had so far. I mean, First Class is going to be a lot more fun. Also Wolverine and also Days of Future Past. Those are going to be better, but you know, First Class is up next, a film that's really good. I really enjoyed it, really fun. Can't wait to dive into that one. But until then, until that fateful day comes for X-Men First Class, Stay swagged out, stay cool, watch more movies, always, every single day, watch a new film or a rewatch a movie like Over the Hedge. And until then, I'm Real Slogan, and I'll see you guys in the movies.